Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN Sunday for Sunday, April 4th, 2021. I'm going to be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off with a look at personal finance. Joining us on the line, she's personal finance reporter for The Motley Fool. Let's welcome back to the program, Mari Backman. Mari, pleasure talking to you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, appreciate it. Always appreciate your insight. And, April's here, and typically April showers bring May flowers, but April showers also bring, tax returns. But the tax return has been delayed this year. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, but I know we want to talk taxes and what the impact of the delay to May could mean. So your floor is yours.
Yeah. So basically, the IRS was late to open up the tax filing season this year. Normally, it opens at the end of January, and this year they pushed it into February. The agency was pretty firm on that April 15th deadline. That's the typical deadline. They were pretty firm on it for a while. But then in mid-March, the stimulus bill was signed, and that included some nuances and tax breaks for unemployment benefits. And there was just a lot of stuff then that had to be figured out. So the IRS decided to give filers an extra month to get things sorted. So now you've got a tax filing deadline that's been pushed into mid-May. Specifically, you're going to get until May 17th because May 15th is a Saturday.
Yep.
So they always push it to a weekday. So you're going to get till May 17th to file your taxes. So that's good news if you're a procrastinator and it's early April right now and you've got none of your paperwork in order and you haven't so much as lined up an accountant. It's not necessarily the best thing to do, though, to delay your own filing if you are due a refund from the IRS. And I want to make it clear that each year, the majority of people who file a tax return are, in fact, owed money back. Mm-hmm. So while the IRS has graciously extended that deadline for another month, if you do a refund and you wait till mid-May, you're really just going to delay your own refund another month.
Oh, well, that's certainly not good if you need cash flow. We still have Americans who are out of work. You want your refund back, and so it makes sense. We always talk about this, Mari, about being proactive, at least getting a sense of where your taxes lie, and not waiting to the last minute. But look, behavior is behavior. You're not going to always change that. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and you want to get out in front of that. And if you're owed money, submit it now or submit it soon, so that money gets quickly deposited into your account.
Exactly. And now here's the other side of that, okay? So while most people are actually due a refund, not everyone gets a refund. A lot of people do end up owing money. I'm one of them, being self-employed. I almost always end up writing out a check to the IRS at tax time. But I'm prepared for that. Unfortunately, not everyone is prepared. And, last year was a weird tax year. It was a weird year. It was a weird tax year for a lot of people. Maybe, people were employed, partially employed, unemployed, employed again. You had unemployment income. Maybe you had side job income. Maybe you picked up extra work on the side because you thought, oh my gosh, what if I lose my job? I better, pad my savings or just line up another income stream. So you've got a situation where, people's taxes may look a little different and people may end up owing money. I also say that for that reason, it's really a good idea to get your taxes done ahead of time. File your tax return, let's say April 15th. You see that you owe the IRS $500. Oops, okay. Well, the thing is, you don't have to pay that money until the May 17th deadline. Mm-hmm. So that would, in that situation, give you a month to say, okay, well, I need to come up with this $500 payment. How do I do it? Whereas if you wait till the very last minute, file your taxes, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, shoot, I owe some money, you're going to be scrambling. And the thing, too, Jeff, is that now, and this is a good thing, we've got people who are collecting those stimulus payments, those $1,400 checks. Yep. Some people should already have, a lot of people should already have that money in their bank accounts. And then there are those folks who are getting that money like as a check in the mail. Those are coming in a little slower, but they'll probably trickle in throughout April. you might have a scenario where, okay, you owe the IRS some money, but okay, look, I've got my stimulus check, so I guess, stinks, but that's where some of it's going. But what you don't want to do is, spend that whole stimulus, then do your taxes, then see that you owe money, and now you've got a headache on your hands. And, to be clear, the IRS will work with you on a tax debt you can't pay right away. You can get on an installment plan. You can pay it off over time, but you'll accrue interest on that. And, if there's a way to just pay it so that doesn't happen, I mean, who wouldn't want to not pay interest? So there's just a lot of reasons to sort of in your own brain, Jeff, kind of tell yourself that April 15th is still the deadline, even though it's not.
Yeah, real smart there, Mari, about getting out in front of these things, and it can benefit the actual individual. Real important. Just one quick question: have there been any? I think you and I spoke, oh geez, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago about the stimulus checks and some of the government aid being taxable. I know some of the state legislatures were looking to eliminate the taxation on that. And I think the IRS or the federal government was looking at that as well. Are you aware of any changes in that development?
Well, so your stimulus itself should not be taxable. So the check that you get from the IRS for the under the new recovery bill, that's yours. One thing where there might be some odd federal state nuance with regard to taxes is, so the relief bill basically it did a very good thing for people who were unemployed last year and collected unemployment benefits. Normally those benefits are taxable, but what it did was it exempted your first $10,200 in unemployment benefits. It exempted that from federal taxes, provided your income didn't exceed $150,000. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of people fall into that boat. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who are going to be getting a federal tax break on, a nice chunk of income. The only thing is, a lot of states, there are some, I shouldn't say a lot, but some states haven't figured out what they're doing with that. So if you live in a state that normally has an income tax and normally taxes unemployment benefits, you'll need to check with, your state or your tax filer, a tax preparer, to see what the rule is going to be in your state specifically. This is another reason I think why, this is a big reason actually why the IRS is giving people more time. The IRS can extend the deadline and states don't have to follow suit, but many do. So just to give people time to adjust to that specific change, which really only came through the pipeline in mid-March once the relief bill was signed into law. So that's still one area, on the state level, at the state level, that's slightly gray. But stimulus checks are yours to keep.
Yeah, really good information. Mari Backman, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. I walk out of these conversations a lot smarter, and I hope our audience appreciates the insight as well. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Sounds great.
Welcome back. Now time to talk technology. Joining us on the line, he's lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. Let's welcome back to the program, Daniel Klein. Dan, great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us on this Easter weekend.
Good morning, Jeff. Did you get me some Cadbury cream eggs or maybe some Peeps?
Oh, man. When you mentioned Cadbury, it took me back to those days when I was a kid and seeing those Cadbury commercials and making my mouth water on this Easter Sunday. I did not, but I'm wishing you and your family a very good holiday or holidays because it also is Passover. And I hope you enjoy the weekend. But lots going on in technology. Technology doesn't stop. Literally, it goes 7 days a week. 24 hours a day. I know one of the things that you wanted to talk about, Dan, was Google is actually bringing some of its U.S. workers back to the office in April, but in a limited capacity. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so is Amazon, so is Facebook, so is Apple. So everyone had this whole sort of notion that the office was dead. Mm-hmm. We've been about a year with the pandemic where most of us are working at home. There's very few people in offices, and we've learned the benefits of flexible office space. And I think we're going to move forward with some flexibility, meaning that all these companies that are, Google is calling workers back by September. They're saying if you don't want to work in the office, you actually have to file for permission, and they're not necessarily going to grant it. And they reserve the right to say, no, you need to live within commutable distance of the office. Mm-hmm. But even with that, their new office week is going to be 3 days a week in the office. So we're moving towards a world where, if you have the sniffles, if your kid doesn't feel well, if you're getting a refrigerator delivered, you're going to be able to work at home a lot easier. But the office isn't dead, and I think that's going to surprise an awful lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's also going to make a lot of those real estate owners happy, right? I mean, the places in think about the big cities, and then this is not necessarily technology based, but you're renting an office space and you haven't been able to use it for 8, 9, 10, 12 months plus. You get you back in the office, you're kind of realizing that the rent you're paying the rent, but also those real estate investors probably really happy about that as well.
Yeah, and I think we saw a lot of people say, "Oh, hey, I'm going to leave the big city and I'm going to move someplace else."
Yeah.
And some of those people are going to keep their jobs, but I've always said I think there's going to be a cost for that. Like if you work for a company and 75% of the people are in the office and 25% are out, if you don't work in the office, that's going to limit your promotion ability. That's going to limit where you can go. And
Yeah.
I know I worked remotely for a team that was largely in office for 6 years. And I physically flew to the office every month. And that was really, really valuable. That got me some things that other writers, other people who never visited the office didn't. You have, Deidre Woolard on this show sometimes. And, it's a challenge for Deidre because she works on a Denver based team based out of an Alexandria office. And
Yeah.
it's not always easy to do that. My team, which is all remote, my boss is in Houston, so the time difference is 2 hours. That's not always easy. We have someone on our team in Australia, so I have a lot more nights where, like at 9 o'clock at night, we're having a long Slack discussion because that's the middle of the day for our Australian colleague. I think the notion of work is going to change, but the idea that the office is dead, I really think that was an overreach. And yeah, we're going to see some changes. We're going to see people go to the office less often. I think we're going to see more flexible offices. I think in the tech world, we might see people who literally commute to the office and live in a co-living situation, sort of like flight attendants do, and then their actual house is someplace 3 or 4 hours away, or maybe like a 45-minute plane ride. I think there are going to be more companies that open offices like where I am in West Palm Beach or in Miami, which are desirable places to live based on the temperature. Where you are in the Carolinas, I think is going to experience some growth. But I don't think we're going to have a largely don't go to the office society.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think that detachment, I think it's proven itself good in some ways, but also when it comes to culture, we've talked about numerous times, both here and on the network, it has a real impact. Dan, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about Amazon. I think this is a really interesting story, and I really wanted to preface this by saying space, the final frontier, because Amazon is launching its AWS Space Accelerator to help space startups. That's pretty neat, Dan.
Yeah, I think this is Amazon putting a toe into what might be the biggest growth area of the next 30 years. I don't say 10 years because I think healthcare is going to be the biggest growth thing in the next 10 years. But if you look, you have to look to the stars. If you're a science fiction guy, you sort of understand the notion that we can't stay on this planet. And Amazon's putting a toe in the water here. They're giving, I think it's 20 companies, basically $100,000 worth of AWS credits to work towards different space problems. And this is a small piece of it, but we're seeing with SpaceX, with Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, which is focused on colonizing space. We're seeing that our world is getting bigger, and I think that has to happen. We're going to outgrow this planet. There's all sorts of resources out there. We have all sorts of problems. Like space is crowded right now, and there's a lot of space debris we need to deal with. Amazon is just one of the companies that are putting a toe in the water here, but I think it's really, really exciting because I'm 47 years old. When I was 20, I thought for sure I'd be taking a space vacation by now. So I think we have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, definitely have a lot of catching up to do. And I know we did that story on the network a couple weeks ago about 3D printing and that adding really a value add in terms of replacing parts. And you don't have to go to Mars or even the moon with everything you need. You can just basically create that. Certainly, thinking back to the NASA Apollo missions, right? They actually created technology and implemented technology to get to the moon, land on the moon. And back then, very basic by today's standards, but the same applies, right? A lot of what gets created for space can also apply for space travel and colonization of another planet or celestial body, because the moon's not a planet, obviously it's a moon. that is creates opportunity for society to benefit from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing like farming revolutions. How we produce food on Earth is going to be maximized by how we produce food in spaceships, in space. You talked about 3D technology and a 3D printing. There's going to be that. There's just all sorts of innovative things you have to do in an environment where you can't just go to Home Depot, when you need something. So I think that's going to benefit all of us. Look, astronauts need better ice cream. They're eating the same ice cream like you could eat in 1975, and
Yeah.
I think that's going to evolve. That astronauts aren't going to be sucking food out of bags, in a few years. So I think that is going to benefit Earth. I think things like how to recycle water,
Yeah. Very
that kind
important.
of thing is going to benefit us on this planet. A lot of what you see the Gates Foundation doing with turning waste into water, that's going to benefit space travel. And I really think in my lifetime, and I'd like to hope my lifetime's another 50 years or so, that we're going to see legitimate, tourism on the moon, colonies on Mars, spaceships going to who knows where. I think we're finally in that kind of science fiction, Star Trek colonize the universe era.
Yeah, or Star Wars, where it's the intergalactic rebellion against an evil empire. Dan, I saw an interesting article, I think last week on space.com, or maybe it was just picked up by them, about almost like a Noah's Ark, if you will, a little bit of a biblical reference there on a Easter Sunday, but they were thinking about storing DNA because how the way the Earth has traditionally gone, we've had basically planet-killing events, right? They killed off the dinosaurs from a meteor or something, asteroid hitting the Earth, and it is conceivable that we will do something because we're human beings and we're flawed and we make lots of mistakes, clearly. But they're talking about harnessing or taking the DNA so that we can repopulate the Earth and storing it like on the moon in some of those underground caves. I thought that was really interesting. And again, to your point, it could help you not only recolonize the Earth after a major cataclysmic event, but you could populate other parts of the universe and the solar, maybe not the solar system, but other parts of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, we always picture like, going to another place. It's like bags of seeds. And here's the reality. It's not going to be that. It's going to be DNA. It's going to be 3D printing. I mean, there might be some seed samples, but the replication for that is going to be very different than what you think. And, 10 years from now on Mars, when someone wants a labradoodle, that's going to be like a DNA grown thing. We've talked a lot about, food replication and growing meat in labs and growing like, a new kidney in labs and things like that. That's all stuff happening on Earth that's going to be essential when we have space travel. We're going to need, the equivalent of the Star Trek, health system where we hold up like a phone to you and it can do a scan and tell you what's wrong because you're not going to have the same resources. So I do think we're going to see meaningful development on Earth that is sort of led by what the needs are in space where, you can only fit so much in your space station. Imagine if you're packing your car to drive it to Mars. And like, that's kind of what going to space is like.
Yeah, it's hard to. I'm actually picturing when you said that. I'm picturing Clark Griswold and the family truckster going on vacation with Edna on the top. I don't know. I just got that picture. Dan, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I love the look forward, and I hope I'm around in 50 years. I'm a little bit older than you are, but I'm hoping I'm around, for maybe another 70 years. I think I'm going to give it because there's a lot of broadcasting to be done. Dan Klein, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. Wishing you a great rest of your weekend. Have a great holiday, and we'll talk to you again next week.
20 years from now, I'll buy you a drink on the moon.
Thank you. I'll take you up on that, Dan. Have a great rest of your weekend.
I'll see you, Jeff. Thank you.
Bye. Welcome back. Now, time to talk a little real estate. Joining us on the line is Jacob Passy. He's the real estate reporter for MarketWatch.com. Jacob, always a pleasure talking with you. Happy holidays to you, and thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, same to you.
So, you have your, as we always say, you're kind of multifaceted you are multifaceted when it comes to what you cover. Little bit of travel, a little bit of finance, and a lot of real estate. What's top of mind this week for you and the readers at MarketWatch?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a couple stories looking at the infrastructure package that Joe Biden released this week, the much awaited infrastructure plan that he's kind of been teasing for a few weeks now. So, surprisingly perhaps to some, the plan, which, is a $2.3 trillion plan, includes over $200 billion that would be put towards housing, which was much welcomed by housing experts across the country. Folks looking at the state of the housing market right now. They always argue, historically, the proponents of affordable housing have always argued that housing is infrastructure. Availability of housing is necessary as part of the nation's infrastructure, and the Biden plan certainly gives a nod in that direction.
So what has been the reaction? Obviously, a plan is a plan. The executive branch proposes, then the legislative branch has to take all this up, and you've got the House and the Senate representing their various constituencies. So nothing is a done deal. But what does this expenditure mean potentially for the real estate market as you see it and people you're talking to?
Yeah. So according to the Biden administration, they say that the money they're earmarking as part of their proposal would, contribute to building or rehabilitating more than 2 million homes nationwide, which is a lot of homes. And
I'd say so.
Obviously.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's received support from, some of the major trade groups, the National Association of Realtors, which is one of the largest trade groups in the country, if not the largest, I think. They threw their support behind the package. The National Association of Home Builders also supported it, but both of those organizations did, in their statements make some notes. There are certain tax proposals and labor provisions. There's a focus on unionized labor in the bill, or the proposal, I should say, 'cause it's not a bill yet, like you noted. They kind of express some concerns about those elements. So we'll see how that shakes out in terms of whatever bills are created in Congress. Interestingly, as part of the plan, there was a focus given to kind of a piece of legislation, bipartisan legislation actually, that's kind of gone a little under the radar, called the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. So that bill would create a tax credit program much like the low-income housing tax credit that already exists. So the existing tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit, is something that developers can use to offset the costs of building or retrofitting a building, an apartment building, and it's focused on the rental market. So they then would rent out, to get access to the tax credit, they would then need to set aside, a portion or all of those units to be affordable units. This bill works similarly, but it's for homeownership. So it would create a tax credit program that's quite similar, where private developers would be able to get tax credits for the cost of building or rehabilitating homes in low-income neighborhoods, with kind of an eye on inner city neighborhoods and rural communities in particular. And if they build those homes and stuff to get access to the tax credit, they need to sell the homes to homeowners, and the price of the home would be capped. It would be capped at no more than 4 times the median household income locally. So basically, trying to create a stock of affordable homes. So according to the Biden administration, that bill alone would be able to create or rehabilitate up to 500,000 homes nationwide that would be affordable housing for homeowners. And there is kind of a focus there on vacant homes, which is an issue in certain communities. There are still a lot of properties that are vacant from the last housing bust, and fell into disrepair after they went into foreclosure, things like that. Some communities still deal with that as an issue, and it costs a lot to rehab those homes. So this is kind of a way of addressing that problem.
Yeah. So next steps on this, obviously or not obviously, it's got to go to the Congress. they have to come up with a bill, right? And there's all this
Yes.
stuff that has to happen behind the scenes, and it's definitely not pretty on how this all kind of happens. But that's probably the next step, right?
Totally, totally. And from the housing parts that are involved, it's kind of interesting because, that legislation I just described, there already is a bipartisan piece of legislation that's been drafted. And then, another element of the housing plan that the Biden administration kind of put forward was creating some sort of competitive grant program is how they refer to it. It's a little nebulous as a concept, but basically they want to create incentives to incentivize communities to rewrite their local zoning and land use rules so that they are more inclusionary. So a lot of neighborhoods and towns and cities across the country, are very restrictive on allowing on what is or is not allowed to be built in their neighborhood, in their areas. So, basically what this means, especially in a state like California, they're very restrictive. And that's part of why we have the housing shortage we have now, because it's so expensive to build new housing because of these zoning rules. And to some extent, these zoning rules prevent, multifamily housing or, duplexes, things like that, from being built in many of these communities, which, reduces the stock of housing. It drives prices higher because of all the competition, and is why we have such a shortage right now. And in the past, when there have been, hearings in the Senate and stuff, this has been an area where there kind of is some agreement between Republicans and Democrats, because for Republicans, this is, falls squarely in their view of, anti-regulation, deregulation. They are supported for that reason. And then for Democrats, this is how you achieve affordable housing. You need to make it easier and cheaper to build housing. And so getting rid of those regulations achieves that goal as well. So it's kind of an interesting area where there's been agreement. So that could be another, when we think of, the kind of makeup of the Senate right now, where it's split 50-50. So, Democrats only have a very tenuous majority. That is an area where you could possibly see some Republicans, signing on if there were to be a bill created specifically for that, because it is something that is, a popular idea among Republicans already. Now, whether, any cities actually take advantage of that, it's not like they're requiring it. I think the structure would be, cities would get funding if they do change the rules. So it's kind of a carrot rather than a stick in terms of the motivation there. But, I think there is an open-ended question as to whether that will be enough to, convince, cities and states to change their rules, since, local pressure can be quite significant against, easing up zoning, because people are worried about, their home prices going down and things like that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch this kind of play out. Jacob, what about mortgage rates? I know you wrote a piece on this week. It looks like they have really taken off.
Yeah, they have. And they, this was the 7th consecutive week that the interest rate on the 30-year fixed rate mortgage increased, according to Freddie Mac. It was only a very slight increase this week, but an increase nonetheless. And, the bad news for anyone hoping that mortgage rates would drop is we had a very impressive jobs report today. Blew past economists' expectations. It showed, they revised previous months upward. So, with that all, the improvements in the, jobs market and in unemployment mean that, there's going to be less pressure on, the Fed and others to decrease rates, or to, do more, efforts to, juice the economy that way. And that probably means that inflation is going to rise. More people are going to be spending money. If you get rehired or get a new job, you're going to, feel a little bit more comfortable, going out and shopping and buying things. And overall inflation drives interest rates higher. So rates are, expected to continue to rise. I think some economists are now expecting them to eventually this year cross the 3.5% mark, which is not, if you talk to, folks who bought homes 10, 20, 30 years ago,
I was going to say
they would
the
tell you,
80s, you had high interest rates, really high interest
right,
rates.
historically low. But I think, Realtor.com, they crunch the numbers, and, just in what the increase we've seen so far this year, it's added basically, in the total cost of the interest over the life of a mortgage loan over 30 years, it equates to a $33,000 increase.
Wow.
So it's not, now on a month-to-month basis, it's only, about $100 or so, but, it adds up pretty quickly. So I think that, as the increase continues, there are going to be people who will exit the housing market because prices are just too high for them to, between the high prices and the higher mortgage rates, they're just going to say it's not worth it. And the interesting thing there is I think most economists are now expecting that will lead to slower home price growth. So home prices aren't going to drop or anything like that. But, as soon as people start exiting, there's less demand, and with less demand, prices will rise less quickly. So there is a silver lining to higher mortgage rates for folks who are looking to buy this year, but also, you're going to be paying more than you would have 6 months ago. So.
Yeah, well, 7th consecutive week. I get a feeling you have not a dartboard, but you have like a board on your wall where you just follow the interest rate, you just check it off like a check off box. I'm thinking you have that.
It's good to. I always check I have the number for what it was prior to the pandemic, on saved on my computer, so I'll know when we cross that point. It's interesting. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how sticky those higher rates are, because I feel like in recent years when rates started to rise, they quickly started falling again for various reasons. So I don't know if the demand is quite there for higher rates, but we'll have to see.
Absolutely. Well, time will tell. Jacob Passy, always a pleasure chatting with you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again next week.
Yeah, talk next week. Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now it's time to check out what's going on Capitol Hill. Joining us, of course, for this segment are the Legal Eagles, better known as David Levine and Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, how are you today?
We're good this week, Jeff. Thanks for having us on. We hope everybody is getting to spend some time with their family this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. David, and I agree. Thanks again for coming on, guys. David, I want to come to you because big case this week, big decision.
Yes, big decision. Kevin and I always love to talk about data and security. Well, we have a court decision on, is data a plan asset? And to cut to the chase, the answer is no, according to the court in the Shell Oil case that involved Shell Oil and its record keeper Fidelity. It's a short decision. It's not very long, but it basically says I as the court looked at this, and the plan data is not a plan asset. It looks at the Northwestern case, for example, as a cornerstone and says there's not case law that supports holding this as a plan asset. So what does it mean for us as we look forward?
What's the consequence? What's the consequence of being a plan asset?
I was just going to that, Kevin, so thank you.
It's like a teleprompter. He's like in your ear as a teleprompter.
I know. I wish I could have him on a different line in my ear. This would be more enjoyable. And maybe he can mute himself. There we go. So what does this mean? Well, there's been a debate in the industry about data use and privacy, especially in areas like wellness. And I think there's a lot of agreement on that wellness is a good thing for participants. There's different views on how wellness should work, and we're not going to get into that today. But the question is, does data, to use my friend Kevin's actual phrase, if it's a plan asset, is it an infectious plan asset? What does that mean in English? That means anybody who got it, if it was a plan asset, are they a fiduciary because they have plan data and they're using it? This decision kind of takes this sort of down the rabbit hole discussion off the table. Mm-hmm. And instead where it leaves us is, let's figure out what we can do with it. Now, it doesn't mean that this is the end. The plaintiffs will likely continue, and there's a lot of discussion here whether it's the different data privacy laws in California or Virginia or things like that. And the Department of Labor may weigh in on rulemaking. You know, Kevin and I can spend an hour talking about the picayune parts of rulemaking. But the key sort of takeaway at this point is it's a start to say having your service providers use data for something is not just a bad thing that creates immediate ERISA issues. There's a lot more texture to be had, but for right now, it's a very, very, very good start. Kevin, I know you want to sing it from the hills, so you go even higher.
Yeah, David, that was well said. I mean, I think the key takeaway here is that there's a real risk because there were the plaintiffs bar and some were speculating that participant information, plan data could be a plan asset, and then as a consequence, that everybody who got a copy of plan data was somehow turned into an ERISA fiduciary. The Northwestern decision and then this decision that came out 2 days ago now on Wednesday in the Shell Oil case. I mean, they help provide a bulwark against that. Now, I think we'll continue to see litigation in this area. I think, the department may take a different view or may adopt a view on this at some point, which could influence the debate. But for now, at least, some of the big fears that, service providers were all going to turn into fiduciaries or that financial wellness was going to disappear, some of those concerns have been mitigated, at least for now.
Yeah, that sounds well, guys. I mean, this is obviously it's got to work its way through the legal system. We don't want to cut our analysis short. We're going to have to see those ones up. But gentlemen, really important news. I think probably a lot of people out there breathing a sigh of relief. Excuse me, at least initially. Pleasure having you guys on, and we look forward to having you back on again next week. Enjoy the long weekend, gentlemen.
Thank you. Bye, Jeff.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
That wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our newsletter, The Morning Pulse, and of course, our website. Don't forget, we're back again tomorrow for BRN AM. I'll be joined by Chief Executive Officer of Phonetic Inc., Ray Connolly. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.